Local public teachers and staff had asked Buncombe County commissioners for a 7% pay raise. Commissioners just approved a budget that gives them a 2% bump.
We were saying either find the money in the budget you already have or think about ways to fund public school education so that we can essentially stop the bleed. We are not just looking for money. We're trying to stabilize traditional public schools and let the public know that they're actually pretty ridiculously awesome.
I'm Matt Peiken, and this is The Overlook, a daily podcast about the news, arts, issues, and trends of Asheville, North Carolina. Today, Pedersen and Lloyd talk about their reactions to the budget just approved by county commissioners. We dive into how teacher associations differ from traditional unions and why that mattered during budget deliberations. We also talk about how charter schools and private schools affect the conversation of pay at public schools. If you've spent any time on Tinder or Bumble, you know this scenario. You're on a blind date and it goes horribly wrong. I mean, horribly in a way you just can't get out of. That's the premise of Some Notes on Dating During Outbreak, a new stage play from Asheville playwright Travis Lowe, premiering through the Sublime Theater. It's got a fancy restaurant, 2 hopeful people, and an entrapment by quarantine. What more could you ask for? Some Notes on Dating During Outbreak opens July 13th and runs 9 performances at the BB Theater in downtown Asheville. For tickets and information, go to thesublimetheater.org. Starting salaries at every school district in North Carolina are set by the state. On top of that, municipalities can tap into their own budgets to fund what's called supplemental pay. But Lissa Pedersen can explain this better than I can, so that's how we started this conversation.
I want to start out by giving an overview of the structure of how local funding for public education is laid out, because I think there's misunderstanding on what happens. The state provides funding for public schools at about 67%, and then local is around the 23% mark, and then there's some federal funding in there as well. And the local percentage it funds many different things, but part of that package is what we call a supplement. And if your listeners who are following this know that we're very low in the national average for teacher and staff pay. So in order to be competitive a little bit more than what the state is doing, because we are 46th in beginning teacher pay in the nation, we're 36 in average teacher pay in the nation, and that rolls in not just with the state pays, but also what local supplements are.
Just freeze for a second. Sure. When you say we're 46 in starting teacher pay, is that what comes in from the state?
That's everything.
That's everything.
So when the state likes to show off their numbers, they're actually rolling in the supplements that local LEAs or local school districts actually put in. So when you have a place like Wake County giving a 20% on top of the state pay, the state claims that as teacher pay. So the average teacher pay is based on what both the state and the locals and the federals give to a teacher. It's the package that the teacher receives in their pay. And so that's rolled in. They're as high as in New Hanover and in Wake, we're going closer to the 20% mark. Here in Asheville and Buncombe, we're at more of the 10% mark.
You say 10% of overall budget.
I'm sorry, I'm confusing things. The supplement that we're asking for, because you're going back to the budget, the supplement we're asking for is a raise in our supplement, which is on top of the teacher pay and the school personnel pay that the state says is minimum. Right? So
on the surface of it, it's a little disingenuous for the state to even roll in local numbers just because every locality is different, right? From what I understand, some municipalities don't add any extra addition onto that starting pay. And there are some, like you mentioned, in Wake County and others that give quite a bit more. It's a little confusing here.
Very confusing.
In terms of what the county gives and what city of Asheville gives.
Yes, that's confusing as well.
So let's dial into what you were asking county commissioners. What were you seeking for from the county and what did you get?
We asked for a few things. We asked for that staff positions not be cut that were brought in during the COVID years primarily for student social and emotional services. We asked for our classified staff to make a minimum of the living wage in the area, which is $20 and approximately 13 cents an hour. We didn't quite get that. They said that we would have a minimum wage of 18, which is close. 2 years ago, we had people making less than $13 an hour working in the schools.
That's crazy.
And I agree. And we asked for the local supplement to be raised by 7% approximately. Okay, so we first asked our local Board of Education, because the way that it's broken down is the Board of Education and the superintendent asks the Board of Education and says, this is what we need for the schools. The Board of Education then asks county commissioners for that budget. So in effect, we are asking for that, but it was really our Board of Educations, our elected leaders on the Board of Ed, who said, this is what we need to make our schools more competitive in terms of North Carolina schools, so that we are in line with a place like Wake or New Hanover. Because the county commissioners have the purse pocket, right? They can levy taxes, property taxes. It's the only taxes they can levy. It's property taxes. And so if they say that we believe what you're saying is true, but we just don't have enough money, they can broaden that pot if the pot's not big enough, right? And so we were saying either find the money in the budget you already have, or think about ways to fund public school education so that we can essentially stop the bleed. We are not getting above, if you account for cost of living increases, if you account for how everything's gone up, and that's why it's $20 an hour for a living wage, a minimum living wage, we would make less than a teacher made about 10 years ago. What they gave us would amount to a 2% change in the supplement. We asked for 7%.
So do you feel that this was the best they could do?
No, absolutely not.
What could they have done? You'd probably say they could have gone to 7%. I would ask you, where would that money come from?
Okay, so the local sheriffs asked for a 7% raise for their personnel, and they got it, as they should. The local county employees asked for approximately a 7% increase in the local supplement, and they received that as well.
There are two populations you just named, and one being law enforcement, public safety, which has gotten a lot of attention lately. Yeah. You mentioned county employees, and because they are county employees, they probably have a much more ever-present voice in the ear of decision makers. And you said that teachers are not allowed, the union is not allowed a seat at the table. So just access. You have people speaking on your behalf almost secondhand in a way that you had, the Board of Education had to vote yes on on just the proposals, what you wanted to see, and then they would take this as proxy. Do you think that the number one problem here is that you just didn't have the same access and seat at the table as other groups did?
Yeah, I just think that the county commissioners do not understand just how strongly we feel that we need this and how serious this is. I believe that they believe the raise in tax that they set forth was a good idea.
Well, they said that they'd put a pin in it. They said that they'd revisit it after the budget was passed at Raleigh, because it's convoluted in how that they have to solidify what their budget is. They say at the end of June, but you know that sometimes our budgets go on. And their budget, depending on what raise they give us, because they said they're going to give teachers a raise, but depending on where that lands, depends on how much the county has to match, because we already have a 10% supplement in place. So
what you're saying, and then Tim, I think you had something to add to this, the county passed this budget, but some of it is contingent on what happens in Raleigh, and then they can amend?
As we understand it, it's a little bit loose right now. And so that's why part of the reason why we're talking to you is, and what you were saying is getting the word out to the general population that we feel like we're in a crisis. As Governor Cooper has said in May, we're in an educational crisis, state of emergency.
Now, to be clear, even though you have a low percentage of teachers and other workers who are in the associations and is technically in this union, you're still representing all of them because everything you're asking for would go across the board to all employees.
We ask for things that would benefit not just all employees, but actually bigger picture would benefit all of our students.
I'm just curious what you both hear, and maybe Tim, you can answer this too. Why are some of your members not in the union?
I think there is a lot of pressure. Both they may think that it's a monetary issue. We actually comparatively have very low dues to join the union. There's also pressure of, what's the word? Just bad,
of retribution. Do you think that
bad outcomes at their jobs, that they'll be too loud and then possibly they'll suffer some repercussions. And then also I think for a lot of staff, they're just so tired. And they're like, and they believe that they don't have much more time to devote to another cause. So they'd rather just do their job and then go home and try to recoup as best as they can.
I'm wondering if you feel by having the Board of Education having to speak for you by proxy, and they're not coming with the same passion, the same need that you are, and they can't speak from the same level of personal experience and vantage point that you can. I'm just wondering if you think that at all has anything to do with why maybe county commissioners only came back with 2%.
For sure. And I think that if you back out and get a larger view of this, there has been an attack on public education for many years now. And so if you couple this attack on public schools, your traditional public schools are failing once they put a letter grade and they don't look at anything but that letter grade, and they say public schools are failing, and we have a lot of people thinking that charters are the equivalent of a public school. And now having this universal choice in opportunistic vouchers that could go to unaccountable private schools. We have demonized public schools, and we said that's just failing, and if you could do better, you would go to charter or private. And so once you put that in line with then also talking about teachers, all they ask for is pay. School personnel, all they ask for is pay. It really puts this kind of bad taste in people's mouths on who we are and what we're asking for. And what we're seeing is our attrition rates, our people are just leaving. We've got long-term teachers leaving. We've got people not wanting to come. So this retention and recruitment is supposed to be this highlight of our school systems. And we're seeing people leaving because of not having that base pay a little higher to keep us here. And when someone leaves, it makes your job higher because you're covering for other people. We've got custodian positions open. We have bus driver positions open. We have school positions open and counselor positions open. And so it's not just, it's a misnomer to think that we are just looking for money. We are not just looking for money. We're trying to stabilize traditional public schools and let the public know that they're actually pretty ridiculously awesome.
Tim, you want to add something?
Yeah, and this is to Lissa's point. It must be stated again every day, all the time, that the governor has said that public schools in North Carolina they're in a state of emergency.
You touched on something, Lissa, a bit ago about the demonization of public schools. And when the governor says they're in a state of emergency, I imagine that a lot of people, at least on one side of the aisle at the state capitol, probably doesn't bat an eye at that. In a sense, it's a state of emergency, they would say, by your own doing, that if public schools were run better, or if they were better performing, however they want to fill in the blank of delegating responsibility back onto public schools for their failure, I would imagine that there are some people who you can tell them that schools are failing, teachers are leaving, they'd say that's the fault of the schools.
For sure. And that's part of the reason why they want people to stay quiet about it. But I'm not saying that our schools are failing. I'm saying you're making our jobs much harder. And when you make our jobs harder, it's harder to reach those goals that we know how to do. And I want to go back into the bigger picture. The governor put the state of emergency primarily in response to the universal voucher bill that's coming up through the Senate. And that says that any human being in this state who has a child will get money to send their child to a private school. Those are unaccountable schools. They don't have to follow statewide curriculum. In fact, I'm looking at my numbers, and Duke did a study in, I think, 2021, and they found that over 90% of those vouchers, and this was when the vouchers were held at an income level, were going to private religious schools.
And that in itself seems as unconstitutional if you read the separations of church and state to any certain degree, that any of my public dollars as a taxpayer goes from my hand to the state's hand, from the state's hand back to the parent's hand, the parent then paying that private school dollars that came from me to send their kid to a religious school. I don't think it's too far out of reach to draw that line.
A religious school that has curriculum that is in direct opposition to the curriculum that we have found would provide a sound and fair education to our students, in direct opposition to those.
You reached out to me originally talking about the distinction of charter schools and also versus private schools, and how they're quasi, this is my word, quasi-private schools. So talk about, from your vantage, the impact that charter schools have on what you're fighting for in terms of pay and benefits for teachers, and also the quality, what's happening in schools and the attrition that's happening in schools. What do you think the effect of charter schools is?
Well, let's look at pay and benefits first. I think that and the quality of the schools they're related, but they're separate. So let's talk about pay and benefits of charter schools. For a charter school to be a public charter school in this state, they do not have to follow the teacher pay scale. I know that for a fact because I called them this morning and asked. They don't have to follow. It's a choice. Only 50% of their teachers have to be certified to teach.
How is a charter school accountable in a way that a private school isn't?
They have to have the testing, the end of year testing, the grade level testing that is in public schools. So they have to be held account to that. And they have some freedoms that we do not have in your traditional public schools. And originally, charter schools were made as an innovative, creative learning environment, and they were supposed to take that learning and what they found to be best practices back to the traditional public schools to strengthen. Now that bond has separated. And so they have the freedom to do the kind of curriculum they want. They have freedom in how to teach and what to teach, as long as their students are passing the end of grade test.
Right. And charter schools, there can be, let's say, an arts-focused charter school. It can be a science-focused charter school.
Exactly.
So, Tim, you wanted to add something to this?
Yeah, I wanted to bring something to the conversation about private schools. I have family that have taught at private schools, and I helped them set up the classroom. And it must be said that at that entire building, that private school, there was one custodian. And the responsibility of cleaning classrooms was primarily on the teachers. And the person in my family who was a teacher, I think we did the math, it was paid about $10 an hour for all the work that they did. And for certain people who may want to take their children to private schools, that is their right, obviously. And often the private schools are also extremely underfunded, and that the teachers may very well be making $10 an hour.
It's easy and economical to promote your event on this podcast, whether it's an upcoming play, concert, fundraising gala, or anything else you want my audience to know about. I can talk up your event right here for as little as $40 an episode. To hear sample ads and order up your own, go to podavl.com/advertise. Just fill in a few details, pay right on the website, and I'll do the rest. That's podavl.com/advertise. We've been focusing on pay largely, and how the difference between the 7% ask and the 2% receive that you got. Are there any other elements of what the county commissioners did in this budget? Is there a specific about X dollars going for benefits or anything like that?
They can't make those stipulations, and that's part of the weakness of the system, is that the county commissioners say, we can say we're going to fund your ask, but we don't have any guarantee that you're going to put it towards what you're telling us you're going to put it towards. I would like to take a pause, though, and go back to charter schools, because it's not just about pay and benefits, even though that's important. My primary concern is that charter schools do not have to adhere to the same standards of the traditional public schools, in terms of they do not have to offer transportation. They do not have to offer free and reduced lunches for students. And what that does is a de facto segregation piece, because you have to have parent involvement to get to arrange for their own transportation and their own food. There are families, due to what happens when you live in poverty, and or they're just busy, that can't be part of that system because they can't meet those needs of their own students. And so those students who don't have that same type of parent involvement, they have to stay in the traditional public schools. And we know that the school is stronger with more parent involvement.
Please give me some perspective if this is not the right way of painting the picture you just painted for me, that while charter schools are ostensibly public, it doesn't cost more money for parents to send their kids. There is no tuition like as in private school, but because of the distance to a certain charter school or just the way other things are set up, that it is not as accessible, not because of cost, but other practical and logistical measures.
Then there's also the soft measures of how they market themselves. And so if you're marketing yourself as a high-achieving school and your college prep, you're dissuading people who have, say, EC needs, which is exceptional children, special needs, people with learning disabilities. You're already setting that this is who we are, this is what we do, this is who we work for. And so they have ways to market themselves in soft ways that perpetuate their kind of insular community. And that demographics mostly shows what the numbers of these grading school systems are. So they can't exactly choose their own students. It is technically a lottery system, but they do have that family tie. So if you have a sibling that your children can go in. And so it keeps it this smaller group, and like I say, it's a de facto segregation piece. And the original voucher schools started right after the Brown v. Board of Education, where there was white flight from these traditional public schools. And that's when North Carolina first started putting vouchers out there. So you could go to this other school and get away from this imposition that they're saying that we have to do.
But charter schools you don't need a voucher to go to a charter school.
No,
but you mentioned a lottery. I didn't know that. So is it really like an open lottery?
Yes.
And if that's, do you have any idea, given your positions, you may not know this, but what percentage of people apply for charter schools that get in?
I actually don't have those numbers at the ready, but I do know anecdotally that people apply for many charter schools, right? And then they find out where they are on the wait list. And there's this whole play of, I'm 12th on the wait list. Oh, 5 people dropped out. So now I'm 7th on the wait list. So there's all this. But if you have a child that goes to the charter school, most charter schools have a provision that the rest of the siblings can go as well.
It's a legacy sort of thing.
It's a legacy.
Right.
But I really wanted to point that out because a lot of times people with the best intention and want the best things for their kids, and we do not want to feel oppositional to the people who we all have the best interests of the children of this state and the children of this country. But the traditional public school is looking for equity for all children. This is the one place in the beginning of life where the community comes together and people who are different than you, come from different backgrounds, maybe identify differently, maybe have a different religion or race or anything. This is the melting pot in the beginnings. And what the system that North Carolina and mostly at the state level is doing is they're implementing this segregation piece where if you don't like that one, go to the charter school, but you can't go because your parents can't get you there.
Well, it seems like a combination of factors. There's the crushing of the budgets, which makes it the low teacher pay, which is forcing teachers and others out of the profession, which makes the quality of education harder, which drives more people to think if my school's failing, I'm going to find another outlet. So they find a charter school. And then you have the voucher end of things, which incentivizes further privatization. And this is one thing I find about vouchers. And I think nobody talks about this. Vouchers don't pay for private school. They pay a portion. And so what it does is it helps people of means already who can send their kids to private school. It just gives them more money in their pocket. Where let's say public school family A that they get a $5,000 voucher, but it costs $20,000 or $25,000 to send their kid to the private school, that voucher is not going to help at all. So it doesn't help them. So it furthers, that goes to your argument, Lissa, of furthering a certain segregation, not by name, but by intent. And so, Tim, one of the things you mentioned early on, is that there were some differences in the asks that the unions were asking for. What were some differences on what your union was asking for versus what Lissa's union was?
Yeah, collectively in our petition, we pushed for $20 for classified staff, 7% raise, that we pushed for that together. But then also we pushed for an advisory committee for exceptional children, and that was put on the petition, specifically, I believe, for Buncombe County. The way that Asheville City Schools, I believe there's already a committee to help with that, and so that was done with the intent of together saying Asheville City Schools employees also want good schools and good outcomes for exceptional children, and that there really needed to be a committee to help with, I believe it was understaffing and just other things like that to really right the ship when it came to exceptional children education.
Was there anything besides just the formation of advisory committees that was substantial in the differences?
The different asks primarily came down to what Asheville City School Board and Buncombe County School Board. Asheville City School Board pushed for $20 for classified staff, and Buncombe County pushed for around $18 for classified staff.
And the other piece besides that is they wanted to maintain some of these positions that currently were being paid for with COVID dollars.
So let's get to a bottom line here. The county has passed a budget that would pay $2 an hour over what it was previously. From what you can gauge of the people you represent, what is this doing for morale? And if it is having any real effect, what do you think is going to be the impact on retention of recruitment? Tim, what do you think is going to be the effect of this?
It is very deflating. I can say specifically for where I work, many of the classified staff there were already every step of the process saying, yeah, we're not going to get anything. And they were just already starting out very discouraged. And so there started to be a little bit of hope when, oh, really? The school board passed this? Oh, okay. And then for us to only get a 2% change at the end of it, it reinforces their already deflated demeanor.
How long have you been in this business and working for the schools, Tim?
I've only been working since fall of 2021.
Okay, so pretty new. Mm-hmm. So I imagine, look, I'm not a custodian. I imagine there's probably a lot of needs for custodians at different businesses, different enterprises, all over the place. You've only been working now for about 2 years for schools. I don't want to put words in your mouth. You tell me, what does this do for your commitment to stay working within the public school system?
I can say pretty strongly that if it was not for my involvement in Asheville City Association of Educators, I possibly would have been at a different job. It is the union and the hope that I find within other custodians and within people at different work sites and teachers as well. There's often a kind of butting of heads between custodians and teachers. But when I hear teachers specifically saying we need to raise our classified staff more, that just fills me with a great sense of hope and really encourages me. So I could say definitively, if it was not for my involvement within the union, I would have definitely looked everywhere else. And I could say that most likely for other classified staff that are also involved.
Lissa, you've been working a lot longer in schools. This is your career. And I imagine it's not as simple of a decision as just what the pay is. What does this outcome from this budget tell you personally? No, let's just start with that.
I will get into my feelings about it, but if we look at the numbers on an average $400,000 house in Buncombe County, they're asking for a 0.01% increase in property tax. So they put out the specter of your taxes will get raised. A 0.0% property tax that the county commissioners has said will do that for education.
Wait, if it's 0.0, that's...
I'm sorry, it was 0.01%.
Okay, so it's 0.01%.
0.01%.
So what?
A penny on the 100.
Every $100 of value of your house.
It's 0.01%. And so on a $400,000 house, that comes out to $3.33 a month towards public education. What we were asking for would amount to 5 cents on $100, 0.05%. And that would be closer to $16 a month on that same $400,000 house. We understand that there's some people that is a lot of money. However, the cost of living is on the backs of renters.
That's a Netflix subscription.
Yes. And right now, the reason why they say the cost of living has raised so much, it's based on how much it costs to put a third of your, approximately, you can check these numbers, but a third of your pay towards renting a 1-bedroom apartment. And so that has gone up 43% since the beginning of the pandemic in March 2020.
In the same vein of what Lissa is talking about, I know sometimes some of the pushback to the raise of the property tax rate is for people who are struggling and who are at the end of their rope, and they wonder how they can afford this. But in all the talking with people that I work with that have mortgages, when I tell them that I pay $1,700 for a 2-bedroom, 1.5-bath apartment here, they're flabbergasted. And it must be said that I also am on the fringes. I also essentially have a fixed income. And so there's no difference between us. And if I could pay, I don't know, 10 or 20 extra dollars at the end of the month to ensure that all of my other people I work with had a livable wage and could actually do well in Asheville, I would gladly find the money to scrounge up together.
It's an individual basis, right, in terms of what people think they're willing to pay for anything. And you can ask people, do you support stronger public schools? They might say yes, wholeheartedly. And then say, do you support paying an extra $13 a month in your property taxes for that? And they go, whoa, that's a lot. That's what I pay for Netflix. I don't know. And then you might say, if you're paying only 5 cents on every $100 of property values, that seem reasonable? Yeah, I guess so. I'm saying there's all kinds of ways you can frame this to people, and it sounds palatable or completely not palatable. So speak for yourself and what you're hearing from your colleagues, Lissa.
Speaking for myself, part of why I got involved with the union is because I want to strengthen my profession. I don't want to feel like a fool. I don't want to feel like I'm being taken advantage of. I don't want to feel like my love for my profession and for my kids is the benefit that they're saying I can take such a low salary is because I'm doing something fun and what I love to do. That should not take away from me making a living wage in the most expensive district in the entire state. And here's the trajectory. If it doesn't change now, when the governor said we're in a state of emergency, when we're coming hat in hand, and it almost feels like we're groveling, but we're trying to tell them, we're trying to say, this is where we're at, and this is the trajectory. What's going to happen to schools in a year or 3 years or 5 years? I have a commitment to the goal and the promise of public education being for the greater good of our continued democracy.
Tim, is there anything you want to add to close your thoughts about this?
Very much just in the line with what Lissa is saying. I believe that the closing of Asheville Primary was a real hit to the community and was a real hit to public education as a whole. And I do worry that if we don't take this state of emergency seriously and we don't take the underfunding of public education in North Carolina seriously and in Asheville specifically, that we could have more closings of schools. And that's not beneficial to anyone.
Our new First Look newsletter gives you just a handful of daily headlines from around the local media landscape to get you on your morning. We also have a weekly newsletter devoted to all things The Overlook that hits you every Friday. Both are free and available at podavl.com/newsletter. And please support the show by going to our Patreon page at patreon.com/theoverlookpodcast. I want to thank my guests today. Lissa Pedersen is an art teacher at Leicester Elementary School and vice president of the Buncombe County Teacher Association. Timothy Lloyd is a custodian at Asheville Middle School and incoming president for Asheville City Association of Educators. Today's conversation happened inside the BB Theater in downtown Asheville, which owners Susan and Giles Collard have been so gracious enough to open to me to record my interviews. Our theme music for The Overlook, Maker's Song, comes courtesy of the Asheville band The Resonant Rogues. The Overlook is a production of Podcast Asheville. New episodes are available every Monday through Thursday morning. I'm Matt Peiken, and I'll see you on the next episode of The Overlook.